experts say the Africa Free Trade Continental Area Agreement has the potential rather to unlock tremendous opportunities for local and global businesses, especially for them to enter into and expand throughout new markets across the continent. Well, trade under the new preferences as set out in the AFCFTA was launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa, the Minister of Trade and Industry as well, in South Africa. That's Ibrahim Patel. That was in January. 12 countries, including South Africa, have finalized their legal modalities to enable trade to commence in thousands of product lines. These range from food and beverages to steel products and equipment, taxis, pharmaceutical products and personal care products. The list really goes on. But we're going to take that conversation now forward. And for that, we're joined by BRICS Council member and Aspen Senior Executive, Dr Stavros Nicolaou, who joins us for the discussion. Doctor, good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Lady, thanks very much, and good morning to all the viewers.
Tell me this, just in your view, I think before we start, for those that have been calling for an increase in intra-Africa trade for really decades, I think at this point, are we finally starting to see the Africa Free Trade Continental Area looking more like something that's becoming tangible for the continent and less like that utopian pie in the sky of wanting Africa to trade more with itself?
Yeah. Now, Lady, as you correctly say, it's been a little utopic by way of conversation. However, I think we are starting to see significant progress. You referred to the legal instruments earlier. Those are important in driving this intra-trade project, if I can call it, because that's exactly what it is. It has a basis in the understanding that the continent, for many decades, in fact many centuries, has been the nursery of raw material exports. So we export raw materials and then we import the finished goods at 30, 50 times the price. So this free trade area aims to set Africa on a completely different course, and part of setting it on a different course is to start buying from each other so that we can aggregate and get economies of scale on the continent. And economies of scale are what allows you to industrialize. You cannot be competitive in any manufacturing setting if you do not have economies of scale. And put differently, Africa has outsourced all of its volumes. We saw that with pharmaceuticals. So this is an attempt to improve, increase intra-trade between the different African countries and set the continent off on a different industrialization project.
Yeah, I'm keen to get into some of those legal modalities that you've touched on as well, Doctor. But I think that just from my view, as far back as I remember, as we've had this conversation, what we've done is we've talked about it really focusing particularly on big business and really, how Africa imports some of its most important products from international or Western nations, for instance. But I wonder if we have this conversation enough for small to medium enterprises and how they can tap into the African continental free trade area. How is it that we can start using the right language and even explaining some of the legal and tariff opportunities that are available to some of the smaller businesses that really are the job creators?
So part of what the free trade area and its legal instruments set out to achieve is to reduce tariffs. Some people are saying tariffs can be reduced by as much as 90% between African countries, to reduce many of the non-tariff barriers of entry. And big business or larger corporates feed into smaller business as well. So the nexus of all of this and the foundation of it is going to be establishing forward and backward linkages and value chains. And in those value chains are small businesses. So let me give you a pharmaceutical example. If we are able to increase our exports out of South Africa, by way of example, of pharmaceutical products into the rest of the continent, the rest of the continent largely purchases, procures its medicines either from donor fund agencies or other entities outside of the continent. If you were to boost pharmaceutical exports, small businesses will benefit in that you need the small guy down the road who's doing the packaging, the foiling, the package insert, the labeling, the small laboratory down the road that is going to do the quality testing. So you start establishing this ecosystem, and that is what Africa does not have. It does not have these value chain ecosystems because we just simply export all our raw materials out. And when you do that, you're not going to build an ecosystem. You're outsourcing that ecosystem, as I said, to Asia, Europe, and other continents.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? Where you start to, I suppose, develop those streamlining of plugging those businesses into markets. Very, very important. I know that you're part of the BRICS Business Council. How does this conversation then feed into the bigger relationship that now Africa, South Africa certainly is part of, but slowly but surely bringing Africa into the conversation from a regional point of view with BRICS and such, and now BRICS Plus, as it's going to be in 2024. How does the conversation of intra-Africa trade feed into that bigger conversation?
So the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was one of the most prominent discussions at the recently held BRICS Summit, which was last August, as we know, in Johannesburg. And of course, there are now of the new members, 2 of them are African, Egypt and Ethiopia. And I suppose it's not by accident that you have more African members now. And I think the idea here is with any one of these geostrategic blocks, whether it is the East, the West, the South, what we aim to do as South Africa, certainly on the business front, the business sector, we aim to look at those markets where there's existing opportunity and those where there's opportunity to grow futuristically. And the free trade area is a significant lever to establish further growth, whether it's with trading or investment with the West, or whether it's the East or South, as I mentioned earlier. The free trade area is an important lever in expanding our markets, improving market access, and looking at new strategic partners moving forward.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that, Dr. Stavros, is the concern perhaps that African nations may be overextending themselves in some of the commitments that we're making to ourselves. I mean, at this point, intra-Africa trade, I believe, sits at 14%, right? That's in comparison to 80% with intra-EU. 60% for intra-Asia, and then we're still trying to stimulate intra-Africa trade, that one would think, well, let's focus first inward before we even start to look at what we can contribute to a BRICS sitting, and perhaps you can add to that discussion, but I want to move it forward as we move on as well. Just the pace at which we're going. The African states have been known to take some time when it comes to agreeing on Pan-African solutions, for instance. But it seems that the AFCFTA has seen a considerable amount of speed. 54 countries having signed, 47 countries having ratified. Is that sufficient?
Okay, so let me just comment, just close out the last conversation momentarily. So we need to, of course, be conscious of the complementarities and the synergies that exist with other trading partners around the world, and that's how you develop your trade patterns. So what was quite interesting during the BRICS Summit is we were able to, for the first time, get a proper handle on what the trade patterns looked like. And South Africa runs a deficit with all 4 of the original BRIC countries. So part of identifying where the business opportunities lie is precisely with identifying complementarities and synergies. And you would use something, as I said earlier, as the free trade agreement as a lever to understand where those complementarities lie. Now, to get on to your next question, which is the pace and execution. The devil is always in the devil is always in the detail, unfortunately, and that is why I am cautiously optimistic, I suppose, at the pace and execution. And I say this because a positive development for me was when President Ramaphosa launched our setting into the free trade area, which was at the end of January from Durban, as you referred earlier, we are using something called a guided trade instrument, a GTI, which is a type of a pilot. So you pilot a few exports of a number of products to particular signatory countries, and you learn from that experience. So you learn what customs issues might have manifested, what the tariff reduction could have been, where the non-tariff barriers to entry are. So you're identifying these through a pilot, and through that pilot you'll be able to perfect the system, because very often things fail because A, there's no capacity, or B, the practicality of the initiative doesn't work. So I'm very encouraged by the GTI, as I said, the Guided Trade Initiative, because it sets a pilot into motion, and through pilots you can start perfecting systems. And that's what gives me personally a lot of optimism around this.
Yeah, and time frames that you'd like to see the GTI then give us resolutions and recommendations?
I think realistically 12 months.
Okay.
Obviously I can be, unrealistically optimistic and say 3 months, but I think we need to work through these things. But the most important thing for me is we've got to have ongoing political will,
right,
and we've got to start establishing more capacity on the continent. And certainly we've got, in my opinion, a very effective Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade area, Wamkele, and Wamkele and his team are going to have to, of course, be the custodians of this, and we'll have to see what capacity they need additionally in order to accelerate things along. But certainly the GTR for me is a very important first step, and a very encouraging one at that as well.
Sounds like a learning opportunity for African nations that are working towards intra-Africa trade. Dr. Stavros Nicolaou, an absolute pleasure having you on the show with us, and thank you so much for your time. We hope you have a fabulous week ahead.